Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's interactive discussion, how to strategically prepare for CSRD ESRS reporting, which we're very happy to be doing in collaboration with Position Green. My name's Leonie. I'm a program manager at UN Global Compact Norway, the local chapter of the UN Global Compact. And it's great to see some of our member companies from across Norway, but also we've opened up to some of the other Nordic companies as well. So the UN Global Compact's aim is to raise companies' awareness of the relevance of ESG issues to their operations and value chains, and to scale the global collective impact of businesses by upholding our 10 principles and contributing to the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so to this end, we give our members opportunities to connect, to learn, to lead and communicate. And this is just a small selection of some of the current opportunities we have. And please get in touch if anything is appealing there. So in the area of reporting, we're offering these Ask the Expert sessions in response to the member requests we had for more support in the area of sustainability reporting. And I really hope that you'll take advantage today of the opportunity to connect with these experts, because it's fantastic that we have them with us today and we can ask them questions and really tap into their experience and expertise. And also I encourage you to share with each other and learn from each other. So just a quick look at what we will cover today. This session is aimed at companies at the intermediate to advanced level. So ideally those companies that are preparing to report in 2026 on 2025 data, but it is open as well to others. So if you are here, you're in the right place, no problem. And so we're just going to do a really quick overview of the CSRD, and then we're going to look at, we're going to explore some questions around digital, the role of digital and data, always a huge issue that comes up. And then Mark and Robin will share some insights and tips they've gained from their projects on double materiality, the gap analysis and reporting phase. And then we'll open up for a Q&A. And we'll also open up for a Q&A when we do the data section. So if you have any specific questions there, please type them in the chat. So just quick housekeeping. We are recording the first half of the session today, but we won't record the second half. So the contents part we will record. We'll send the slides and that in a follow-up email. You know, please, it'd be great if you could type in your first name, last name and company name so that we know, we can see where each other is from and share with each other. Please mute when you're not speaking and use the raise hand or chat function to ask questions and comment. So quickly to introduce our experts, we have Mark, a senior manager at Position Green, Frida Jonassen, the onboarding team leader of the platform at Position Green, and Robin Kolos, associate at Position Green. So I think with that, Mark, I will hand over to you and the Position Green team.
Thank you very much, Leonie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your input on the Menti. It's important for us to get a sense, I think, as participants as to where people are in terms of their CSRD alignment. I know it's a pretty substantial piece of regulation that's coming to us from the EU, and it's interesting to know, as we're kind of moving towards national implementation here in Norway, where companies are and what sort of level of thinking has been happening inside the companies, but also in parallel with that regulation, what companies are doing on ESG generally in terms of, have you started looking at the strategy questions, developing targets? So that's where these two questions were quite relevant to get a mix, sort of a view of the mixed perspectives in the room. So that, I think, spoke for itself, that everyone is at different stages at this point. Interesting to see that no one's done a double materiality assessment. So that's in line with kind of the audience that we were aiming towards today, Leonie, that, you know, they are considering the DMA potentially, but they're not quite started with that yet. So that's great. My name's Mark Jordan. I'm Senior Manager at Position Green. Robin, yourself, you work in the same team as me.
Yes.
And we work on strategy and reporting projects. Sorry, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, briefly. Robin Collis, associate at Position Green, wrote my master thesis on ESRS. So I feel like I've gotten quite some experience in the last year at Position Green on the ESRS and everything there. Yeah.
And thank you, Robin. And also with us is Frida, our colleague from Platform, who works alongside us on several of these CSRD alignment projects. Frida, did you want to say hello?
Hi, nice to meet you all. So I work on the software side of things at Position Green. So I work with implementing ESRS reporting, double utility assessment, and other parts of the kind of ESRS journey for our customers, and also part of developing our solution for ESRS reporting at Position Green. So nice to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, Frida. So I think we can go through to the next slide. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Position Green itself, very briefly, about who we are. I won't read these slides, but what I think is important to bring home here is that we are a product company. We work collaboratively with product development team. There's about 70 people working in product development at Position Green. So really what that means is that the knowledge and the advisory work that we do on ESRS in terms of advisory, that is coded in and to embed the regulatory requirements. And the whole purpose behind this is to give organizations the tools to move away from Excel type reporting, which I'm sure a lot of people in the room today, or virtual room, are familiar with, to more digital reporting, which is a core requirement under the regulation. And I think as we move forward, the role that we want to play is to be more of a sparring partner with companies on strategy work, as companies take more ownership and responsibility for reporting, and that is an expectation under the regulation as well. So I'll move on to the next slide. We'll come back to some of these points, but just wanted to frame the thinking in terms of how we work with our companies. Well, we work across different sectors and industries. We work with large multinationals to smaller companies, and the expectations and obligations with regards to CSRD alignment will differ depending on the company itself. And one of the things that we also do remind companies of is, if they are not caught by the regulation, it's possible that their external stakeholders and investors are required to do this, and they'll have expectations on this. So it's important to keep that in the back of your mind as well if you're thinking about alignment. And go to the next slide. Just a quick disclaimer: obviously the experiences that we've had working with clients on CSRD are in line with what's available today, but we're not a law firm. We don't provide legal advice on the regulation, and whether you are caught or not by it, we highly advise that you take independent legal advice to ensure that you understand what your requirements and obligations are depending on your setup and structure. Okay. I'm not going to talk about what the CSRD is and the different types of ratchets in terms of what company is caught at which stage. But what I will say is it is a more granular piece of regulation, departing from the non-financial reporting directive. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive provides sort of mandatory requirements when it comes to conducting this double materiality assessment, and as an audited or limited audited process, which means that there is a requirement, if you look at the standards here on the right, to really consider those different topics and assess, speaking to teams outside of sort of the traditional ESG remit, talking to finance, risk, strategy, to better understand what can be ruled out. And the core purpose here is to not have 1,200 data points to report on when you come to the final report, but a much slimmer version. And that allocates more resources to those material topics, and it also creates better efficiencies over time. Again, I won't focus on the green point on the left. I think that is more a matter for each company to do their investigation in terms of understanding when they are caught. Obviously, in Norway, in March 2024, the Norwegian government gave its approval for the CSRD to be incorporated into the Accounting Act. That means that 1,200 Norwegian companies are likely to be caught by this. But as I said, stakeholder expectations will also be a driver for companies to align with this regulation. And the consequences of not complying with CSRD can be significant in terms of the administrative sanctions that can be rolled out across different jurisdictions outside and inside of Norway. We'll see that develop. But also in terms of failing an audit that a company would apply to either the DMA, the double materiality assessment, or the reporting. In terms of the alignment phases that we see within Position Green, we count 5, and these are from the DMA all the way through to the reporting. These are very strategic stages, particularly in terms of the engagement that's required during the DMA across different teams. That it will be very different if you've done a DMA before from, let's say, a GRI-based DMA. There are more granular requirements. The audit requirement also, we'll come to that in a second, but will require more communication and engagement. Going through to the gap analysis, we'll come to those points. The data management part, obviously, as a result of the data management, as a result of the gap analysis, you will need to collect relevant data connected to what's been identified as material, and then put forward a roadmap for closing those gaps. Once you get to the report phase, it is tempting to think of this as a kind of a closed loop, but there is a 6th stage which lies underneath, which is connected to the operationalization of how you are over time going to be minimizing your impact, changing your business model, which is very much the ambition of CSRD. And that is really the ongoing due diligence that you'll be doing as a company. And you'll obviously been taking note that there is a broader regulation called the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive that is following this. And that obviously connects into the wider due diligence work that companies will be doing moving forward. But we'll leave that aside for now and move on to the next slide. I just want to make sure we have time for Frida to speak a little bit about the role of digitalization connected to CSRD. So I'll hand over to you, Frida, at this point.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. So, as Mark mentioned, there is a lot of benefits and need to digitalize the work that you're doing with your ESRS reporting. And if you want to switch to that, or maybe, perfect. So I want to talk a bit about why you need an ESG software for your CSD and ESRS reporting. So having a software will not only digitizing your work that you do with ESRS reporting, will not only help you meeting the requirements, which, as Mark mentioned before, is really important from a compliance point of view, but it also kind of helps you moving beyond this compliance, because it can help you progress and achieve goals and targets to drive performance. So being able to monitor process, being able to see a set of actions and objectives. So really taking your time instead of closing those gaps and make it part of your the operational aspect, as Mark mentioned as well. Also being able to follow up on goals and targets that align with your sustainability strategies, but also previously communicated data. So for example, part of ESRS is reporting on your targets, on your metrics regards to those targets and what actions you're taking. So being able not only to report that, but also being able to follow up on that and actually turning that reported data into actionable insights. And there's a lot of efficiency wins. So by streamlining your reporting processes, it reduces the manual effort you have to put in. Instead of chasing different people through emails, you can have the platform do that for you instead. And letting you focus on actually impactful initiatives like setting up an ESRS roadmap or implementing your strategy around it. And as I mentioned as well, having those knowledge wins, so understanding and reporting on a complex standard, having help in and having that understanding and clarifying the different milestones. So how do you move from a DMA to your disclosure reporting, to your sustainability statement, and understanding how you do, what you need to do along the way. And also, it gives you strategic advantage. For example, if your data is not trustworthy, you don't know where that data is coming from. If you can't get easy insights into that data, how can you make strategic and sound decisions? So really helping you to transform this compliance exercise into an actual strategic advantage.
Thank you, Frida. Thanks. So now what I'd love to do is actually open up for questions you might have around data or comments. So please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Yeah, let's discuss. I mean, I have a question that's come through. Frida, what's the biggest change you've consistently noted in companies that have digitalized their reporting?
So I would definitely say kind of wins in efficiency, as mentioned. So, and also, of course, data quality. Before, we've had a lot of customers that are, there's one person sitting in an Excel sheet, collecting that data through different emails. So when the auditors come knocking, you have to find all of that again, understand who gave you what input. And also, instead of just you as an ESG controller, ESG manager at your company being the only one reporting, actually being able to delegate that work. And also that helps with engaging more people in your organization, which is crucial for ESRS because it's not a one-man show. It's something that you have to do with the whole company. So being able kind of leveraging that has helped a lot of our customers that moved into digitalizing.
Are you finding that companies are using different data, like they're combining? I've seen some sort of surveys where they need to combine platforms.
Yeah, I mean, what we're really focusing on at Position Green is creating an ecosystem. So what a lot of our customers is doing is understanding where in the organization do you have data, understanding how that data needs to work with each other. How can we have data being looped into Position Green, for example, for ESRS or ESG purposes, but then some of that data might need to be fed into Power BI or another kind of ERP system. So being able also to creating those data flows, because now ESG data, it can be HR data, it can be financial data, it can be all different kinds. So really being able to kind of see how your systems can work together in ecosystem to be able to get those data flows. And of course, the end goal for a lot of our customers is trying to automate as much as possible to be able to spend less time on actually finding this data and having those key people reporting it.
So we're going to move on in a minute to talking about materiality. And I see Solmaz has put a question in the chat there. So Solmaz, will come to that. But does anyone have a question relating to data that they'd like to discuss with the group or with Frida before we move on to the DMA and gap analysis and reporting insights? I mean, one question I had was around the XBRL tagging that's required. I mean, is that an extra step that needs to happen, or how?
So what we're going to find really interesting now is seeing how companies would want to handle that, because it's not a requirement just now in the beginning, but it will be a requirement to have all of that data digitalized, tagged with XBRL tags, and seeing if that's something that you will be able to do in either your software system or with your financial data. So kind of understanding where in the process our customers we want to do that. But that's definitely a benefit of digitizing your work, is to really be able to also have this digital tagging, which is a future requirement, but also having, of course, that data published with your financial reports as well.
Thanks, Frida. I think we'll move to Mark and Robin to the next part. Thanks so much. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Leonie. So what we've got now is we've divided up the different CSRD alignment stages into 3 here. We're focusing on the DMA, the gap analysis, and the reporting phase. And we'll invite you to Please, this is an interactive session. We want to really answer your questions and challenges and thoughts that you have. So please keep the questions coming so we can have a more of an interactive dialogue with yourselves. But what I'd like to do is run through some of these points. I'll start with the DMA and then I'll hand over to Robin to talk a little bit about the gap analysis and reporting projects. But as I said at the start, the DMA really is a strategic starting point to the CSRD alignment phase. It can take up to 3 months to do this. So it is quite a substantial piece of work, and it does require active engagement by different senior management representatives across different teams. So one of the things that we've noticed and from the projects we've been involved in is that it is very important to have buy-in from executive management and from other members of senior management before you head in to the actual DMA. At the risk of it being derailed, it is actually better to hold and actually do some training and upskilling on key principles of ESG and sustainability and what the regulation is about, so that you're ensuring you get that relevant buy-in. And that can be across different teams that you could do this upskilling. You could involve finance, you can involve legal, just because these are the different new stakeholders that you'll be engaging with throughout the DMA. The next point is here in the scoping phase is around your value chain. The CSRD is looking for you to assess impacts, risks, and opportunities at across the whole organization. So that includes your own operations, but it also includes your value chain, both upstream and downstream. So in terms of where you source materials from and other key stakeholders, you will need to look at the potential or the actual impact that those entities are having as well on the environment or society, and as well as the financial opportunity or the financial risk of sustainability events on your company. And that's the financial materiality lens. The third point we spoke about at the start is to have that dialogue with the auditor. Most of the time, the auditor that does the actual DMA audit is going to be your financial auditor. So it's good to have this dialogue early, because we're all kind of at the same phase in terms that there is no standard on how to audit a DMA under CSRD. That is yet to come. So it is important, as it is a very subjective process, to have a dialogue to understand how the specific auditor is going to be approaching the audit for that DMA, as well as reporting later on. The final point is on group structures. There are different approaches that you can give yourself to do the DMA. One is to do a sort of top-down approach at the group level, and another one is to actually do a bottom-up, doing the DMA across the different subsidiaries, formal subsidiaries of the company, and then aggregating those results up. In order to make that decision as to how you do this, it's important to ask yourself a few key questions. Examples of those questions would be, where is the sort of the knowledge on sustainability? Is it more in sustainability teams at subsidiary level, or is it hosted at a group level with a group team that disseminates sustainability decisions and management systems at the subsidiary level? So where are those risks managed? Is it centralized, or is it more at a subsidiary level? And these are the sort of questions that will help you to decide on the type of approach you should take. So once you've done these sort of scoping phase questions, the next point is around the DMA itself. And during the DMA, we identify 4 key stages, from mobilization through to assessment internally, through to validation of the actual assessment itself, and then finally the finalization, where you present those results to executive management. One thing that is important, as I said, up to 3 months of work, you need to be transparent about the scope of work that's going to be required, both during the DMA, but also thereafter, in order to ensure that you do get active participation and understanding of the benefits of this alignment with all the stakeholders that you'll now be involving. As I mentioned, finance and risk and legal are very key components to getting the right type of input to ensure you can pass an audit at the final stage. During the assessment phase, again, one of the things we've noticed in projects we've been in is this tendency for companies to bring in many different representatives to the internal task forces. That's not a key requirement. What's important is to have decision makers on that team that are obviously having internal discussions so that they come to these sessions and actively participate. And that keeps the process pretty fluid and to time, so that you don't risk obviously defaulting on the timeline that you've got. And same with the actual validation of the actual assessment that you're making. The regulation requires you to actually do stakeholder engagement both internally and externally, but this should be mapped to the complexity and to the setup of your organization. So you will do different types of engagement dependent on the setup that you've got. So you might wish to do a survey if you have a very extensive workforce to inform some of the social standard requirements. Or you might do more stakeholder interviews externally if you have impacts across different industries and jurisdictions, to ensure that the high impact areas, you do sense check the assessments that you've made on them. The final point, again, is on the finalization stage. It is important to keep that executive management updated throughout, so that they don't come in as this is the first meeting they've had when they are presented with the DMA results, because then there will likely be more of some challenging questions, and you'll be extending the DMA assessment phase even further. So if you engage them across these different milestone moments, it's more likely to be more of a sign-off and a formal approval meeting than a drawn-out discussion. And again, this is not just a one-off exercise. This should be part of a more long-term strategic roadmap. So it's important to involve the executive management and upskill from the start. So with that, I think that should give a good roundabout overview of the insights we've gained from the DMA projects. I'll hand over to Robin for some of our gap analysis insights.
Yes, because after you finish the DMA, a lot of clients I've spoken with think that they can now have a good overview of which data points do we need to report on and just start reporting on that. That's not entirely correct, because there's quite a big step, as you can see on the left here, with selecting data points. So the DMA is very focused on material topics, so climate change, pollution, etc. While a gap analysis is more focused on data points, so more ESRS minded. And it's important to not focus on data points during the DMA, because then you will mess up and you will only focus on the ESRS, and that will be too narrow of a scope. So there's quite some work to be done here. But what can really help you in the DMA process is to have really good IROs, so impacts, risks, and opportunities coming out of the DMA process. Because if you're really able to really select specific IROs that are really appropriate for your company, then you're more able to scope out the irrelevant stuff from your reporting. So I think that's a really good tip to actually focus on what is important for your company and what is not relevant for you to bring in. And a really key point I like to bring up here is in the guidance from EFRAG, so the body that's written the ESRS standard, they actually write that you should consider the objective of the disclosure requirement when assessing the materiality of data points. So for each disclosure requirement in the ESRS, you start with an objective, and then several data points follows, and it's the objective you're supposed to answer, and the data point it's supposed to support that answering of that objective. So if you see that this data point isn't really relevant for us as a company in answering this objective, then you are allowed to omit that data point. And I think using this option will really help you in selecting specific data points for your company, because every company will have a different scope of data points. Even if you have really similar DMAs and companies, there will still be minor differences here. So in this stage, you want to ideally end up with a long list of all the data points you're supposed to report on. It will be a lot, but you will have a list of what you think you should report on. And then you get to identifying the gaps. And this process really depends on what you want to get out of the gap analysis. Because a gap analysis isn't really a predefined term. We generally have 3 types of gap analysis. It's the first where you only look at disclosure. So what did you report last year? How aligned / not aligned is it to the standard? You can also do gap analysis on data availability. So do we have data for this? And you can also add in data quality there. So do we have the data, and how high quality is the data of? So you need to make a conscious decision on what do we want to get out of the gap analysis, because all of these 3 will provide vastly different input for you as a company. And this feeds into my next point also, because there's a trade-off between granularity and feasibility, especially depending on the maturity of your company. Because if you're really immature on the sustainability reporting, it doesn't really make sense to do a really in-depth and really detailed gap analysis if you're going to end up with saying we don't have this for almost everything. Then you can do it more high level, maybe just on disclosure requirement level, and say that we need to work on this, we need to work on that, and you will get the same picture with less work, so to say. And then you can do more gap analysis as you go and make them more and more detailed as you mature as a company. And in the identifying gap stage, I just really want to highlight that you should read the standard itself, like download the document from the EU and actually read the standard, because it's really hard to get the context with just reading a single data point, even from the lists that the EU provides on data points. It's really hard to understand what do they expect of me here, and what do we need to report for this specific point. So that's a really important tip right there. And in closing the gaps, you should make it more than just a tick the box exercise. You should use it as a management tool, the gap analysis, and you should really link it to your ambition. And this feeds into my next point on a gap is not a gap, and prioritization is key, because a gap can take 10 minutes to fill, and it can take a year to fill. And it really depends on your level of ambition. For example, for the transition plan, that's like 12 data points. You can check that off by saying we don't have a transition plan and we're never going to have one. It's compliant. But do you really want to communicate that, and how? So you need to set the level of ambition, and you need to decide where do we want to improve in order to report honestly and transparently on what we report. And the last point here, involve the entire organization in the gap analysis. They know where the gaps are, and they know how long it will take to fill the gaps, and they need to be comfortable and own that process. And if we want to move on to the next slide for reporting, it's a really time-consuming process to do reporting on the ESRS. We have estimated about 2 to 3 times longer to write an ESRS compliant report than writing a normal sustainability report. And this has a lot to do with these 3 points under here, especially structure, because the main objective almost of the ESRS is to enhance structure, enhance readability, understandability, and comparability between companies. So actually getting a good structure and being concise and to the point, it's really important. And again here, good IROs is your friend, because having specific IROs of this is where we impact, try to build your report around it. Because really, if you report on something, it should stem from an IRO, or from other legislation that's mandatory. But if you report on something that's not an IRO, you should really ask yourself, why do we report on it then? Because if it's not an IRO, it's really not that important for your company to focus on. And you should also use the flexibility that the ESRS provides, because you're supposed to split it into the E and S and G section. But apart from that, you are quite free to design your report as you want and to focus on the areas that you want. So if you see that health and safety is huge for your company, take health and safety and make it its own kind of section or chapter of the report and put emphasis on it. So you should really put emphasis on the material things and not spend so much time on the less material things. And when it comes to data management, this is also a time-consuming aspect. It's important to start early. It's important to actually check in the entire organization. Do we have all this data? What's the quality of the data? They will probably know whether it's good or bad quality. And especially for E1 and S1, so E1 climate change and S1 own workers, you should just start collecting data straight away. It will be material for you. Like, I won't see many companies that won't have these two as material, and they are the two substandards with the most quantitative data points. So you should really start early, because you don't have a lot of flexibility in saying, we don't have this yet when it comes to metrics. You need to report it or you need to estimate it. So if you don't have high enough data of high enough quality available, you should try to estimate it. And this will take time, and you will need to actually map this out. And from a last point here, create a coherent report. It's important that the policies are aligned with the targets and the action plans and the overall strategy. Because what you often see with governments, for example, they set really high ambitions for, we're going to be net zero, we're going to be this and that, really ambitious, but they don't really have credible action plans to get there. It's really important that you set targets and you actually have a plan to get there that's doable and that's really credible, that you communicate to your stakeholders. So you should really focus on this, on planning, putting up resources, making the targets achievable for yourself. And again here, read the standard, read the guidances from the EU. I think it's really important that although even if you hire a consultancy to write your report or to help on your report, you need to know what you're being assessed on, and you need to know what you're being compliant with. And it's really important to understand the context and to be able to defend to the auditor, for example, why you've chosen to report on something but not report on another point. So I think with that, I'll leave it to Mark here to explain a bit on how we work with our clients on especially this point.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thanks for your insights. I'll be very quickly, only because I know we want to have time to address some of the questions that are coming in, but just a quick minute on this. The way we work, as I said at the start, we really wish to be more of a sparring partner for companies who are answering their obligations under the CSRD. And as a result of that, we really push hard for companies to own the reporting process under CSRD. So they doing the reports themselves, and we're there to support them as a sparring partner. And that can start with the upskilling that we discussed at the start in terms of how do you write a sustainability statement. So we usually advise having some training and a workshop at the start where advisory supports. But then the solution, the products that we have in terms of reporting give you the autonomy to actually do this yourselves using a platform, a digital platform. And then if you do that, we also provide some writing tools and some guides to really understand what the regulation requires versus what this could look like in practice. And we have different templates that we provide. And some of this, obviously, we try to embed into the product for ESRS that we have developed and that Frida also works on. But also the advisory team have developed a kind of long sheet of Q&As from our engagement with the regulator, with EFRAG, on some of the common questions around how to do this in practice. So, you know, I think it's important over time with the audit to have a better understanding of those requirements, because these are on the company. If you go to the next slide, Eleni, there is some of the key points that we've discussed. I think it's just, we'll share these slides with you, but overall, just do see this as a long-term alignment phase. Prioritize on what is relevant to you as an entity, to weed out those things that will come probably later on. But the buy-in and the upskilling at the start and then throughout the process are important parallels, tracks to have whilst you're doing these deliverables. And this will make the role of the sustainability lead hopefully much easier over time.